he had a model, and I said, well, why don't we apply this model at Boğaziçi University with Turkish teachers as a beginning, and then because it was an online project, we also had now a PhD student of Nikos, Stefania Cordia, who is becoming a prominent researcher as well. And also I collected data and directed 2 PhD theses based on this topic. But obviously, it's a journey, as we say initially in our project. We went from one stage to another, and we are still traveling in this journey. And today, thanks to Peter da Costa's presentation, I also had some inspirational ideas related to our starting point, which we left at the moment, and which led us towards some different realms. Okay, since I don't have much time, I cut it short. And I just want to start with the outline of my talk today. I'll be basically very quickly summarizing, since we have some Ministry of National Education teachers who are not maybe familiar with the topic, very briefly, status of English today, and spread of English, etc., very briefly. And then changing times, changing Englishes. I use the word Englishes, and when you write it in the Word file, in a Word file, you'll get a red mark underneath Englishes, but there are really Englishes, different varieties of Englishes in the world, okay? You'll see what I mean. And then I will talk about L for EIL awareness, which EIL stands for English as an International Language, L stands for English as a Lingua Franca. And in our research with Nikos and people who are working with us, we don't differentiate between EIL, ELF, or World Englishes, WE. For us, they are tools to help us to feel more confident, more relaxed as far as our emotions are concerned, as teachers to teach English in our English language classrooms. Okay, and the last one is integration of a new perspective into English language teaching and alpha-aware pedagogy. Alpha-awareness is a concept which in fact emerged in our data, ELF-TED project with Nikos, and then Nikos developed it further and related it to teacher language awareness research and created alpha-awareness paradigm. And I'm going to give examples from teaching English literature in the EFL classrooms, something we experimented with a former PhD student of mine, Darya Altınmakas. We have published it in as a book chapter. I'm going to give examples from literature inspired by that article and study we carried out some years ago. Okay. Oh, sorry, what did I do? Okay, status of English today. When we think of English, we have to think globally, okay? And we should be ready to send out our students and teachers and our even children abroad, and we need to prepare them for a global world where English is a common language. So it's not, strange to have families sending out their children to the world like that today. And things have changed since I was an undergraduate student. Many of my English language teacher trainees go abroad before they graduate. When I was studying, it was a kind of a dream. It was almost impossible to go away from the university. But now they all have this experience. And even in primary schools, in secondary schools, through Erasmus projects, e-twinning projects, I'm sure the teachers from Ministry of Education are familiar with it. They do go abroad. They take their students abroad, and people come from other countries. Okay. So in a way, Mackay said some years ago, English is the passport to access modernization, global world, and prestigious way of life. Actually, since then, there has been a lot of research on these topics, one of which was mentioned yesterday during Dr. da Costa's talk. I mean, it also represents elitism in the society. So using English shows a kind of a higher status in the society. So it is in fact necessary, as Mackay also says, for international relations, popular culture, academia, education, and many other domains of life. And how did English become such a global language? And we see English language spread in 3 major phases. The first phase is from immigration to North America from South Pacific. And the second, in the 16th century, English travels from Britain to the United States. And then in the 17th century, it goes all the way from the Atlantic Ocean towards the Indian Ocean to the Asian countries. So that's the colonization period. And rise of Anglophone USA comes into picture after 1950s, after the Second World War. So English becomes the most popular second language or foreign language in the world. So this is, in fact, a map that I learned about when I was an undergraduate student while taking History of English course. Unfortunately, it is not in the curriculum anymore, but it has to be put back, I think, in all English language education curricula. Because we start learning English about English or about English culture through British language and literature, American language and literature courses, thinking that later on in our actually educational life, English only belongs to British or Americans, okay? But in the History of English course, I think it was the roots of my becoming what I am today, and my interest in sociolinguistics grew out of that experience. I learned a lot about how English language became what it is today. So, in fact, Kashru, in his 3 circles model, very well, sketches it out, starting from nothing, is going up to the expanding circle. So normally, when you Google it, if you write Kashruvian circles, you see 3 concentric circles. In the middle, you have the inner circle, the English-speaking countries, and then outer circle, post-colonial countries, and then expanding circle. This is not the original model that Kashru devised, although it is under, obviously, a lot of criticism, but still it gives us a good sketch of the status of English today, how it is located, actually, at least the locations. Although all these circles, according to Kanagaraja, all these circles are within each other now, but it doesn't matter. It is actually gives us an idea of how English is, localized. So it starts from nothing because if you know about history of, okay, one question. I don't want to give you the answers, actually. Did you study British literature? Yes. Okay. Did you study Beowulf? Okay. Did you understand anything if you read the original article? Do you think it was English? How did you understand it? You had to have a glossary. You had to have translation. I had a wonderful English language literature teacher. I want to mention her name, Jale Parla. She actually, my English literature was 100 out of 100. I'm proud of it because of her. She was giving us glossaries, explaining everything. And I was very happy to read all these texts with the glossary next to it. So it was because English has become what it is after King James's Bible. I think it was 16th or 17th century. You can again Google it and find it out. So initially, English, in fact, has become what it is throughout the years. So that's why you don't understand old English texts, because it's not the English that we know today. And the English that we know today is codified around the time of Shakespeare, when he started to write 16th century or so. I'm not an historian, so I don't know exact dates, but it's after King James's Bible. There are 2 important turning points, and Shakespeare, 2 important people in making English what it is today. Obviously, there's also a film nowadays, which is, talking about the first dictionary in English language, the construction of first dictionary. Okay. So, okay, just very briefly, what are these circles comprised of? Inner circle, in fact, refers to monolingual, norm-providing countries like Britain or United States, traditionally. Outer circle countries are, in fact, post-colonial countries, where English is used as additional language or a second language, or, auxiliary language. And they are endonormative, international, as well as they have intranational as well as international uses. That's why, for example, when you go to World Englishes conferences, you listen to some talks about codification of Filipino English, for example, or Singaporean English. Okay, and when you hear some local English varieties of Southeast Asian countries, you may not understand them, but it is actually a variety of English. So, and then expanding circle of English countries are English doesn't have any official function, but it is a kind of, it's an instrumental function, like for educational purposes, for business purposes, like Turkey, Brazil, Japan, where there is no there's no colonial past. Although this is the case, I want to give you one example from Kızıltepe and Seren Doğançay Aktına 2005 World English's article, where she says that in Turkey, English is so important that there's a mushrooming of, at that time, of private schools where medium of instruction is English, where colleges are running, are in a kind of competition to teach in English. So this is much more than in you would see this picture not in a post-colonial country, but in Turkey it is in fact more than a post-colonial country giving importance to these issues. And that's why in 2014, for example, I never forgot this. When I went to India, I was surprised to see that some people did not really speak English. But because there's 300 million people, or maybe more now, I don't know, only 10% or 15% of about 30 to 40 or 50 million now maybe, people speak English. The rest speak many different local varieties that you cannot imagine. There are hundreds of local languages. Anyway, so this is another area of study. So I just don't want to go into this detail, but we are definitely belonging to the expanding circle here, okay? Even though we give a lot of importance to English. Okay, so we are in changing times, changing Englishes, so we need to revisit the definitions of the difference between an EFL student and a post-EFL student. When we, before late 1990s, the student had a linear life, and it was identical of user's life, and he or she was exposed to English language or second language or any foreign language in the classroom in an instructed setting. And they were taking those courses in order to sit exams, in order to enter universities, and they had very little opportunities of going abroad, but this was the case. So they had instrumental functions, and they did not have much chances of using English outside the classroom, okay? In the post-EFL era, I would say, again, beginning of 1990s or maybe late. I cannot really trace the time, but I can only follow it through my English as a lingua franca research and World English's research, chronological order. The student's life is no longer linear to the English language user's life is not linear to a student's life. Okay, it's different because the student does also have a life outside the classroom with English. Okay, and the student still, as a student, he or she still needs to learn the language in order to sit exams, enter schools, do whatever, actually further studies, work in companies, etc. But they had a different user's life because outside the classroom, actually they are using English. They are exposed to English, like as we were talking about it yesterday, in the linguistic landscape of the country or city they are living. In actually online gaming is very popular among children, and nowadays they are crazy about this Netflix videos. We were very surprised to see so many secondary school and primary school students are following Netflix videos. They don't watch anymore television programs. And one of the students in an interview for the Enrich project, just Dr. De Costa showed you, said that he improved his English through these videos more than what he learned in the classroom. So this is something that needs to be further investigated, and this is something we English teachers should be aware of, so that what you are doing in the classroom is not just staying in the classroom, and maybe they are exposed to more. Okay, in that sense, Nikos and I first made an attempt to define what alpha-awareness or alpha-aware research in teacher education was, or English language teaching was, and we said that it is the process of engaging with ELF research and developing one's own understanding of the ways in which it can be integrated in one's classroom context through a continuous process of critical reflection, design, implementation, and evaluation of instructional activities that reflect and localize one's interpretation of ELF construct. Okay, there are many aspects of this definition. One of them is obviously theoretical aspect. The second one is, how am I going to do this in my classroom? Because I am in my comfort zone, I am exposed to so much English language teaching, education programs, and I know a certain way. Why should I, switch from this? With a little bit of critical perspective, you can actually see how significant it is, just by looking at your environment. And trying to see what your students are doing outside the classroom. You will see, you can start reflecting more on it and then maybe seeing a critical aspect of it. So it's in a way where you still have the same materials, but you start developing a critical perspective based on these already existing materials, already existing ways you are, in fact, practicing. Okay, ELF, as I said, it started out with our project, and we experimented with it, and then Nikos Tifakis, in fact, tried to theorize it, and he published it in the Journal of Applied Linguistics 2 years ago, electronically. Right now, it is in its, I think, print copy. It came out, and he develops he actually says that there are 3 components of ELF awareness. The first one is in English language, in relation to English language teaching, okay? The first one is teacher education. The first one is awareness of language and language use. This is something you are familiar with. This is something you are trained to do in the classroom, okay? So it involves engagement with language, both conscious and explicit, subconscious and implicit, and you all have a theory of language in your minds, and then when you come to classroom and you interact with your materials, you in fact reflect this, okay? And it refers to knowledge of, obviously, syntactic, morphological, lexical, phonological, pragmatic, and sociocultural features of English produced in interactions involving non-native users, both inside and outside the ELT classroom. We all have our conceptualization of language and how it is used. And as teachers, we are programmed to correct everything our students, every mistake of our students in the classroom because of all this awareness, okay? And the second one is awareness of instructional practice. A major form of this component is of ELF awareness is awareness of teacher-centered practice. It revolves around what teachers do and do not do in the classroom, includes their personal theories about instruction, corrective feedback, and about gauging and responding to learners' needs. So the way you design your materials, the way you implement them in the classroom, whether you include different perspectives or not, everything is involved under this awareness of instructional practice. Everything that goes on in the classroom. That's related to your interaction with the students and the students' interaction with the materials and among themselves. So this is the second one. The third one, which is pretty difficult to trace and investigate, but not impossible, it refers to the major impact of ELF communication and use have for learning, okay? And since English has become part of our day-to-day interactions and there are different modes of interaction, face-to-face, online, and offline, it involves what necessarily restricted to non-native users, appropriated by these users, as a result ceases to be a foreign language to them. So it becomes their own language, okay? Their language. So that's one of the questions I ask to my students in my sociolinguistics class. Is English your language? Are you a native speaker? Sorry, I don't say that. Are you a bilingual speaker of English? They say no. I say, why? Because we haven't learned it simultaneously. And I say, no, that's not the case. Think about it. What do you do in your English, in your university classes? You use English as medium of instruction. You use English to understand the content of your course materials. You are a user of English. So why do you think it doesn't belong to it's not your language? In a way, of course, we are all bilingual users of English. Although, I'm not relating it to any of the theoretical backgrounds. I'm just looking at it from a more utilitarian perspective. We are using English. Right now, we are using English, okay? To communicate, to deliver this talk, okay? So, why not to feel that it belongs to me, rather than it is somebody else's language, that, and I try to teach it, and it's a kind of an ideal that I couldn't have reached, and I expect my students to reach that ideal. So this kind of ideas, looking at, that's what I mean by critical way of looking at your instructional practice. Self-awareness, Nikos continues, is learners attending typical English as a foreign language classes are users of English. And these experiences with ELF use plays an important role in their learning. So without realizing, they are using English in gaming, for example. My 10-year-old niece plays all the time online games with her friends and with maybe international people, and who are not necessarily native speakers of English. So, okay, I just want to not want to take you long. My second part is, okay, what can I do with it? What can I do with this kind of an information in my mind? As I said, in 2012, we experimented with a university English language and literature in an English language and literature department. I think it was academic writing and speaking course, and they were reading. It was because it was an English language and literature department, and which is mistakenly constructed in Turkish language. How do we say English language and literature in Turkish language? İngiliz dili ve edebiyatı. What does İngiliz refer to? English refers to British people, okay? So when we say, that's why in Turkey, in the İngiliz dili edebiyatı, İngiliz dili eğitimi, we always immediately activate our schemas and relate it to British people, okay? So anyway, and my colleague who is here today, Derya Altınbakas, said that, shall we try another book this year? I don't remember which book it was, but I will give you an extreme example. It was a book like E.M. Forrester's A Passage to India, which was post-colonial perspective of a British author. We switched from this to Halit Hüseyin's The Kite Runner. And she used that book in her class the whole year. And the results were fantastic. She interviewed with the students, and then we analyzed them, and we found out that the students said in one of those interviews, I'll finish in a minute, this was the most enjoyable book I have ever read. I want you to think about these issues, okay? There's literature outside there, which is in fact, again, referred to by Bath as hybridity. It uses a hybrid language. There's no harm in maybe mixing with other languages. As Dr. De Costa also said in his initial, in his previous talk about Kanagaraja, Suresh is a dear friend of us who was here many years ago to give talks like that. He actually used Tamil and English in the classroom, and he was, kind of criticized to be not a good English teacher. So in fact, in this book, we were not obviously encouraging the students to use their first language or anything. This was not the idea. We were showing them how significant and valuable their first languages are as much as English. And this doesn't really necessitate you to obviously teach in Turkish all the time. This doesn't necessarily say that. It is actually giving significance to language. First language, second language, whatever, is also as important as your the language that you are learning. Okay, so this was the case. And in this experiment we did with Altınbakas, we in fact proved that. The students at the end gave better maybe assignments, I don't know. She was the teacher. But I was interested in the research aspect. They were much happier. They associated themselves with the culture, with the switching, because there are a lot of Persian words in Turkish, and in Pashto language, if you read Kite Runner in English, the novel, not the film, okay, there's a lot of switches, okay, between Pashto and English. And for example, Halit Hüseyin preferred to use direct actually translation, or he put in the paragraphs the translation, the meaning of the words, unlike for example, Salman Rushdie, who gives glosses beneath the text, okay? So it, in fact, gives us, they are post-colonial writers, but as people from the expanding circle, we have lots of, okay, authors who write in English. Orhan Pamuk is one of them, for example. He writes in English. Elif Shafak writes in English. And some interesting fact is these people write in English, they don't translate, okay? And then they write, I don't know about the Turkish part, sorry, excuse me, but as far as I know, they are separate. They don't translate, okay? And then I also came across Halit Hüseyin, I just gave you an example, Francesca Marciano from Italy. Actually, I published this as a foreword in a book that's published in Italy for teachers, teacher education. And that's why they wanted me to write an introduction. It wasn't, I think, a foreword, or I forgot now. There's a difference between foreword and preface and introduction, okay? So they said, you're not going to write about the book itself. You're going to write something related to the book. I didn't talk about the contents of the book, but I wrote some kind of a commentary about the content. And I picked this point because it was about literature. Okay. Anyway, so Francesca Marciano she's from United States, and she actually uses a hybrid language, and she's similar to what Orhan Pamuk and Kadir Hüseyin does. And I used it to give an example. Okay. So why not to include such richness in training teachers to teach English literature and culture in the post-EFL era is my question, okay? And because I think this will raise teachers' and learners' awareness towards the fact that their linguocultural background is significant in their use of English. And this will increase teachers' and learners' motivations towards teaching and learning of English. And maybe this is the first time I'm listening to a talk about emotions, teacher emotions, make them more positive about their profession and engage them in, and both from the students and learners, teachers' perspective, they make them more engaged in the topics, the language, and they don't see it as a separate subject. I also strongly emphasize that one of the success in the way of teaching language, English language, is not seeing English as one of the other school subjects. It is something that your learners will use for the rest of their lives. It is part of their lives, okay? So we have to see it that way. As long as we see it from a more mechanical perspective, like the language and linguistic aware perspective, we cannot, I believe, achieve the desired outcomes of our English language teaching. Yes, these are important, but we should not forget that language is part of life. And classroom is a small community of practice. So it is the place where your learners encounter English first, and then they immediately practice it thanks to technological advances. Or I have to put a question mark, I'm not sure. But it does help at this point. When we publish our interview data from the Enrich project, when we collect some proper data with permission later on, we are going to emphasize this because everybody uses, actually, especially children uses this. Okay, now I want to go to the end. So we need to obviously find ways of how to integrate an alpha-aware perspective into our classrooms. There are different, and we need to discuss over the issues. We need to bring into your attention all these topics, which are very theoretical and philosophical. So therefore, we need to do more classroom-based practice in relation to alpha-aware pedagogy, and bring it into conferences and maybe do some workshops and discuss these issues with you. And we are on the way of doing that, and we believe that the benefits of innovative language, English language teacher education model for a global language can be listed as follows, as we said in the previous talk: reflective. It makes the teachers more reflective of what they are doing, and we also want them to integrate an alpha-aware perspective, which in my recent research on CLIL, in the language classroom for secondary school classes is evolving into a different direction, but for the time being, as far as actually international research and Turkish scholars' research and my previous research is concerned, we will be looking at how we can integrate a World Englishes or ELF perspective into the classroom through exposing students more Englishes and different Englishes. And I will be happy to share with you. Obviously, there are some struggles. I just want to say this and then finish, okay? Obviously, there are some obstacles. We have to struggle with mindsets which are already constructed based on native speaker oriented perspective. And not every teacher is open to this. As I said, they prefer to be in their comfort zones. And obviously, lack of appropriately designed ELF-aware materials is another problem. And what do I say here? And I want to quote Kumara Vediveli and finish. ELF-aware instructional practices are entirely in line with current concerns about the importance of applying a post-method pedagogy. So we need to search for new and innovative ways of approaching English language teacher education in order to, in fact, make our English language teaching more promising in the future, to produce better, I don't want to say better, more English language users. Successful English language users. Thank you very much for listening.